One of the greatest piano masterpieces of the 20th century was nearly its greatest flop. My third concerto has turned out to be devilishly difficult. I'm nervous, and I'm practicing hard, 3 hours a day. It's December 1921, and Sergei Prokofiev is holed up in chilly Chicago, anxiously preparing to premiere what will become one of his most famous works. As hard as it is to believe now, this piece wasn't destined to be a hit. In fact, it was Prokofiev's last lifeline. Just 3 years earlier, Prokofiev had left Russia for the United States, hoping to achieve a career much like that of his compatriot Rachmaninoff. Fame, fortune, and tons of adoring fans. But unfortunately, things did not turn out so splendidly for him. Prokofiev was generally a much more iconoclastic figure than Rachmaninoff, much less able to attend to the taste of the American public, and much more interested in playing full nights of his own music.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
He quickly realized that, much like the present day, audiences preferred dead composers to living ones like himself. So the Third Piano Concerto was like Prokofiev's Hail Mary, a last effort to prove whether he belonged in the United States or which would send him packing. It ended up being kind of both. A few decades later, another young piano adventurer was born, one whose fearless interpretation of the Third Concerto of Prokofiev would introduce it to generations of musicians to come, myself included, none other than Martha Argerich. And the crazy thing is, it's only one of several iconic performances of this piece that she's done. But the 1977 video feels particularly special. She was about 36 years old, only a few years older than I am now, and only a few years older than Prokofiev was when he premiered the piece himself. We actually have recorded evidence of Prokofiev playing his own concerto. He recorded the piece in 1931, and it was actually one of the first pieces of his own that he ever recorded. When you listen to these two recordings side by side, you really start to understand how this work is not just a shining example of Prokofiev's brilliance, but also how it became a cornerstone of the repertoire. No matter where Prokofiev lived, he was always a bit of an outsider. He was incredibly intelligent and also had a quite cold and detached personality. French composer and pianist Francis Poulenc once called Prokofiev the Russian Liszt. And there's truth to that. He carried that same sense of 19th century bravura, but with a decidedly modernist edge. At the same time, he was a free spirit, known for youthful sass to his senior Rimsky-Korsakov and for late-night jams with Gershwin in Paris.
Prokofiev is always his own man. You can't make him fit into any box. He doesn't sound like anybody else. He just sounds like Prokofiev. In fact, there are some people who will say, oh, he's much too conservative. And then there are other people who will say, oh, he's much too modern. But bottom line is, he's a true original.
And who better to give us insight into Prokofiev's legacy than the pianists who have lived and breathed it? Throughout this video, we will hear from pianists who have spent a lot of time with Prokofiev's music. These are clips from full-length lessons which are available on Tonebase Premium, the platform which makes videos like this possible. Be sure to check the link in the description down below to see what is there. It's just the tip of the iceberg of all of the hours and hours of incredible content that's available there. Indeed, throughout the many different eras of Prokofiev's composition, he always finds a way to bring together the best of the Romantic and classical traditions with the ingenuity and fierceness of 20th century modernism.
He himself even describes the 5 stylistic traits of his music. The need for a strong form and structure, that sense of beautiful melody, lyricism, that wonderful motoric energy of his, the need for a personal harmonic language, usually built on traditional harmonies, but spiced up, and that wonderful wit and sense of humor.
The Third Piano Concerto shows off all of these elements really clearly. He finished writing the work in 1921 while staying in Brittany, already considering giving up on the US altogether.
He appeared with the music of great novelty, quite unexpected, qualities which made people talking about him as a young barbarian.
It's quintessentially Prokofiev, but it also contains a kind of youthful optimism, something which we don't always hear in his later works. The first movement begins with this paradox immediately. It starts with a somber melody that's quickly intercepted by a strong, rhythmic, driving material that almost makes us think of the Russian futurist tradition. This is almost like Prokofiev's mission statement, the past and the future in dialogue and in conflict. A fellow Russian exile, the poet Konstantin Balmont, was also living in Brittany at the time and caught a glimpse of the concerto in progress that Prokofiev was working on. The tide foams wildly on. Overall, Prokofiev, music and youth blossom, and the invincible Scythian beats the tambourine of the sun. The dry wit which Prokofiev was famous for appears in the movement's second theme, a sarcastic little dance paired with castanets, as though he's inviting the audience to get up and join in the dance. Whenever I hear this movement, I'm often reminded of the great Hollywood film composers like John Williams or Elmer Bernstein, composers whose work is noble, sweeping, and majestic. It's kind of like Prokofiev was inventing the sound of American heroism before anyone else did, though of course in his hands, that heroism can't last for very long. In the second movement, Prokofiev makes the battle between past and future explicit. It's a set of variations on a theme which is reminiscent of a Baroque Gavotte, a folk dance which actually originated in Brittany, where Prokofiev was living while he was writing this piece. In concert music contexts from the Baroque onwards, the Gavotte was usually a light or comic dance, and here it starts that way too. Almost as if Prokofiev is sneering both at what came before in the first movement and what came before in music history. But then the movement turns into something absolutely profound. A rare moment where Prokofiev allows that tender and gentle side of his barbarian image to be revealed. The Russian composer Nicholas Nabokov, who was indeed the first cousin of the famous Vladimir Nabokov, wrote about Prokofiev for The Atlantic in 1942. In that article, he wrote that the second movement of Prokofiev's Third Piano Concerto was one of the most beautiful things he had ever written. I think that the best music Prokofiev ever wrote is not the sarcastic, joking music which is so well known in this country, but rather those infrequent pages composed in a more lyrical mood. This movement gives us a chance to hear Argerich at her most personal as well. In his own performance, however, Prokofiev keeps a certain distance from the emotions of the material, almost like he wants to remind us that despite all of the modernist textures, this is still a Baroque Gavotte at its core. Then Prokofiev comes crashing back in with the third movement. It fits into the traditional sonata form, ending with an Allegro, but this is an Allegro with more attitude than Haydn could have ever dreamed of. When I think about this piece, and honestly when I think about piano music in general, Argerich playing this movement is probably one of my favorite things of all time. Whenever being a pianist feels too difficult, too unstable, too frustrating, too hard, I come back to this performance. The feeling I get from hearing Argerich play this piece reminds me why I do what I do. In this movement, we hear Argerich at her finest, her signature technique bringing this material to life in just a remarkable way.
Follow through of the opening of the hand to taking the note and then pulling in, and recovery. I think when I sat next to her and I was playing, we were doing some Rossini overture or something, I just started laughing because I'd never seen fingers like that before in my life. I mean, they were just so beautiful and so developed. You could see every muscle practically in them, and just how free she was. A fascinating personality is always inspiring to listen to.
This movement and Argerich's performance of it point to a larger trend of 20th century pianism, the turn from the piano to a percussive instrument which still retains an entire range of expressivity. As Nabokov wrote, it has often been said that the modern pianistic style owes much to Prokofiev, the percussive use of the piano.
Almost imagining a metallic body that produces the sound, so what my teacher used to call fingers of steel. And it can be applied negatively if that harsh sound is coming in a place where we expect beautiful sound, but here I think fingers of steel are completely warranted. To make it very articulated, extremely active fingertips.
The finale of this movement feels apocalyptic, but in a fun way, as though we're just seeing this giant wave of white light approach us, like we're about to fall into it, into the cosmic oneness of the universe. I know that seems a bit hyperbolic and perhaps a bit pretentious, but I just, honestly, words cannot express how much I love this and what feelings I get from it, so I just had to try somehow. And this image isn't completely random. Actually, at the time that Prokofiev was working on the Third Concerto, he was also working on a white quintet, a piece that would have no accidentals in it whatsoever. While that piece was never realized, fragments of it are found in the Third Piano Concerto, blazing through the finale. Prokofiev and Argerich's recordings of this piece feel like two sides to the same story. On the one hand, a composer who could never quite find a home, and on the other, a pianist who has made her home in the hearts of millions around the world. But Prokofiev's story did not end so triumphantly. The Third Concerto didn't solidify Prokofiev's place in the United States. Despite its quite positive reception, he left the United States for good in 1922, heading to Europe only a few months after the premiere. It was quite a disappointing conclusion to Prokofiev's American adventure. After a few years in Europe, he returned to the Soviet Union, chasing a stability that never came. In spite of his myriad successes, his last years were characterized by failing health and struggles with the artistic requirements of the regime. And his death in 1953 was overshadowed by the death of Stalin on the exact same day. Prokofiev may have been silenced, but his music never would be. And when Argerich plays the Third Concerto, we hear his music coming home. And that's what happens when any of us play any of his music. We are giving it a home in the present day, creating a bridge between the past, the present, and the future, just like Prokofiev would have wanted.
When you uncover all the layers, you will find there is that soft Russian soul of a teddy bear just waiting to be uncovered. He hides it with the pianism and the virtuosity, but there are so many layers to his music. In fact, his music covers the gamut of emotion, and I find it emotionally, musically, intellectually, and spiritually satisfying.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's so much fun to talk about literally one of my favorite piano concertos of all time, one of the coolest pieces ever written. Let me know in the comments down below, which piano concerto should I cover next? Which piano concerto should I do a big video on? I love reading all of your comments, and I promise I read every single one of them, so be sure to sound off down below. And if you liked hearing from Barbara Nissman, Norman Krieger, Boris Giltburg, and Boris Berman, then you can hear more from all of them and many, many, many other fabulous pianists on Tonebase Premium. There's hours and hours of incredible content diving into some of the great works of the piano repertoire. Whether you're a beginner pianist who needs some help figuring out how to warm up, an advanced pianist who needs help structuring your practice routine to get even more piano gains, or just somebody who really enjoys deep dives and conversations about music, there is something on Tonebase Premium for each and every one of you. And the fragments we showed today are just a small sample of larger, really fantastic lessons on Prokofiev's music. And don't forget, if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Here on YouTube, we've got tons of videos about some of the great piano concertos of the repertoire. For example, Busoni's Piano Concerto, Barber's Piano Concerto, Schoenberg's Piano Concerto, Rachmaninoff Fourth Concerto. There's quite a big back catalog to dive into if you liked what we saw today. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time. I'm nervous, and I'm practicing hard. 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day. That's not that much. Okay, makes me feel better about how much I practice. Ay. It's like he's daring the orchestra to keep up with him. Ooh, truth or dare?